Hello and welcome to Gaming, the podcast from Indie by Design with myself, John Robertson, and Stace Harmon. This week, we're talking about environmental storytelling, what it is, why it's important, what are some good examples of it, and how it can change our response to what we see and what we play and what we hear. If you like the episodes, then it would be fantastic if you could leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, as it really does help us reach new people. And also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at Indie by Design, that's all one word, at Indie by Design on all platforms. That's it for the intro. Now here's Stace Harmon.
Last week we talked about Portal and what makes it great, and one of the things that I kept coming back to in replaying Portal was how amazing the environmental storytelling is in that game. And in this instance, as a broad definition of environmental storytelling, I'm really thinking about things that if there were no other characters or dialogue in the game, if you just moved through the game space and the environments in that space, would you get a sense of what the world was, what was going on? So it's really the space that you move through and the way that you move through it is as a broad definition for environmental storytelling. I kept coming back to how amazing it is in Portal and how minimal it is and how amazing it is. And that then sent me back to the original Half-Life, because of course there's the opening scene in Half-Life where you're on the monorail going into Black Mesa. And that still holds up today, 20 odd years later. I mean, it's still an incredible piece of environmental storytelling. And that was, late 90s. Was that for you one of the early kind of standout video game examples of environmental storytelling? Or are there other ones from earlier that you recall?
I think there probably are ones that I would notice earlier, but I don't know if I was really thinking about it like that at the time. I think Half-Life 1 when you're in the Black Mesa facility and you're going along the train on the rail and you see all of these things around you as you go, and you've got the woman, the voice on a tannoy, like talking to you. Although does she talk to you in the original Half-Life? I've just been replaying Black Mesa, like the Half-Life remake, and she talks to you in that, but I'm pretty sure she does talk to you as well in the original Half-Life. Let's just say she does. Yeah. I can't remember it. Maybe I should have watched the video before doing this. But what I think is really clever about that is that piece of environmental storytelling in the Half-Life intro is, it tells you a lot about the base, and it tells you about your role, and kind of tells you a lot about you in response, and like what you think, what Gordon Freeman thinks is important in life, like clearly science and the truth, and all this sort of hard work. Dedicate yourself to working on science and the truth of science, otherwise why would you be in this facility like underground? And that's a pretty big commitment,
miles away from anything, and absolutely, not near civilization.
If you didn't love what you were doing and weren't really engaged and passionate about it and believe in it, then you're probably not going to be there. So it reflects a lot on the character that you're playing. But I think one of the cleverest thing that it does is you actually see very little in that. So you just see rooms here, rooms here, rooms here, rooms here. But because you're moving, it makes the space feel enormous. It makes the facility feel enormous, like much bigger than it actually is. Like it feels much bigger than its geometry actually, than what exists in its geometry. I think that's one of the best. That's one of the things it does best. That's one of the results that it creates that's most powerful, is it does make you feel like you're going into this absolutely giant, enormous facility. When in actuality,
it's very clever world building. I think it's clever world building as well as environmental storytelling. Like it's doing two things, and those are distinctly, or at least there are subtleties of differences in those two things. But it's because the playable space in Half-Life is really not actually that big. It's not that big a game. So that notion of like suggesting that it is, and suggesting that Black Mesa is this huge thing, this huge entity, is a clever ploy. I've always been interested in it though, and there are similar things in, so like Sid Mead's concept work for like Tron and Blade Runner Aliens and stuff.
I think that they're great at environmental storytelling as well, because you can, like, I was a kid, I would spend like an hour just like looking at those things and just like drawing links between things and like creating those stories, which are all in there for you to find. And of course you add your own bit on top, so everyone's interpretation is that little bit different, which I think is very powerful kind of conceptual world building. Like it's, you know, it's a classic conceptual art thing, like 3/4 of the circle is made for you and then you fill in the last quarter of the circle, so everyone has a slightly different response to it, which makes it powerful in that way, because there's a lot to talk about. It's interesting to talk about how you've perceived it differently. But I'm also thinking just off the top of my head when I say that as well, like I used to do it even on things like Where's Wally books and stuff like that, just like because they've got a huge amount of environmental storytelling. They've got like little stories in there, like hundreds of stories per image. So yeah, I've always been interested in that.
That's I like that connection actually, because it is in the way that for me the best environmental storytelling works is that it is somewhat optional. It's optional to the extent that it needs to be such that a player needs to be able to move through a space, and if they don't see what the next player sees, they're not really missing anything. It's just all about what you're gaining rather than, oh, you've missed pieces of the puzzle or you're going to get stuck later because you didn't see this hidden thing up in the corner. Yeah. And Where's Wally books do that, because not everybody's going to see the same things. Like they're going to, you know, I might see that guy chasing the dog or the dog chasing the guy, and you might never see that on that page. And it gives me a little chuckle, but it's that empowerment thing as well, that like, it makes me feel a bit clever for seeing something. Well, it's a reward.
And I think that's a good point, because some of the best environment, or probably the best environmental storytelling in games, is when it rewards someone for taking notice of it and being observant and taking interest, but it doesn't force its way on you. So it doesn't not undermine, but it doesn't get in the way of the gameplay. Like it doesn't slow the game down. Someone just want to rush through and just see the quote-unquote story, like, even though, of course, environmental storytelling is, the clue is in the name, it's part of the story. But if they just want to see the plot, like the beats, and then they can do that. So I sometimes think, like, maybe like the best environmental storytelling is kind of invisible. Well, not invisible, but like it doesn't make a point of standing out. So even things like, you know, textures even. So normally like environmental storytelling is like, oh, look, there's a skeleton there and it's got like an arrow through it. There's probably some danger here or something. And we can probably infer that people use arrows or used to. But like it could be like textures, right? So it could be like, you know, this place is really downtrodden and dirty and something bad has happened here because of the way, or it's, you know, it's just unloved because of the way the textures are done, because, you know, it's like plaster's peeling off of the walls and the brickwork is exposed. Or something that The Last of Us does a lot is like nature reclaiming the world. So grass and moss and stuff grows on all the walls and stuff, so it immediately it gives it, and it's not invisible, obviously it's very visible, but it's not making a point of standing out. It's just like it's all in the background.
It's that, and that player interpretation thing. I think there's an essence of like, what do you interpret, as you alluded to already, outside of video games. The same thing happens, but that player interpretation thing is key. For me, it's key to how rewarding I find it, because I can spend some time in, particularly, seeing as you brought it up, particularly something like The Last of Us, I can spend time in that game just looking at stuff in the photo mode, taking pictures of things, and making up, almost kind of unbidden, just making up these stories in my mind as to how this thing happened. How long ago did this particular building, you know, have there been survivors here since the outbreak, and like how long has this place been devoid of human life? And one of the reference points for The Last of Us was a book called The World Without Us. And it was like a thought experiment. It was an examination of, if humans just disappeared tomorrow, what would happen? What would happen in our major cities? What would happen to the subway systems that rely on these huge mechanical pumps to keep the water out of them? At some point they would break down, there'd be nobody here to fix them, etc., etc. And so, yeah, The Last of Us does that really well. And I think in context, having recently replayed Last of Us Part 2 again, that the continuation of that from the first game to the second game, it just enhances that. It actually adds to the impact in both games of the environmental storytelling, because you see a progression. You see that this isn't just a point in time thing 20 years after the outbreak, as it is in the first game. You then see that 5 years later, here's what has happened.
Yeah, there's a lot more water, isn't there? And the second one, water's risen. The water
Seattle
table
is turning into Atlantis.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so, those things, like you say, they're not invisible, but they're not being, I think, like, they're not being shoved down your throat. But as in the real world, like if I walk down the street and I look up and happen to catch some particular architecture that's, above street level, I think something about that, and I feel something about that. If you walk down the same street and don't, you're not being punished for not noticing that. So there's like an enhancement in one sense, but without the punishment in another. So it's not like a puzzle where if you solve a puzzle you feel great, and if you don't solve it you feel actively like, oh, I haven't been able to do this thing. It's far more subtle than that. So, and I think it's far more work than that to do it well. The textures thing in particular that you mentioned, I think that's really interesting. Like something like Dead Space, where you arrive and, it's pretty clear quite early on that things have gone to hell, but the textures in terms of like the floors being all scuffed and dirty, and you can see that there hasn't been much maintenance. And that it there hasn't been for quite a while. Same with somewhere like Rapture in BioShock. And I think that, I talk to my kids about like how refuse collection is so important, because if they stop doing it, you would notice it very, very quickly. Very quickly, those bins would be overflowing. And that is a sign of something that tells a story. There's like either there's civil unrest or there's professional, picket lines and people are striking, or like it's immediately telling you something. And the same thing happens in video games. We mentioned like BioShock there. That's another very, I guess, common or famous example of it being done.
Yeah, that's when that's when it's often pulled up, because you can tell so much. That really is an example of if the dialogue was taken away, if the interactions with other characters were taken away, etc., would you still know what the game was about? Well, yeah, probably. You'd have a pretty good idea. You'd know that it was, there's philosophical quotes everywhere, so you know that it's it's been built on some sort of idealistic principle to serve a certain, or to prove a certain theory or whatever, and that there's been a lot of murders and problems, there's blood everywhere, there's bodies, and what time, there's the New Year's Day symbols, logo, what do you call it, neon lights and stuff, that have just like sort of been left there, trashed, so you can kind of infer not even a year, but the day that it all happened. That's one. I often see BioShock as, obviously it's amazing at it, and The Last of Us as well. They're both quite, they rely on a density of environmental storytelling, I suppose. Like there's loads of stuff to pick up from, absolutely loads of stuff to pick up from if you want to. But it can be just as powerful the other way around as well. Like sparsity can be just as powerful, especially when you rely on the juxtaposition. And I think the Portal is a very good example of that, from the test chambers into the back rooms and the pistons and the much more complex, like less prescribed, less sort of clinical, like way that wires and doors and fuse boxes and stuff are just kind of like put together.
I think it grounds it. It feels more human, I think, doesn't it? It feels more, even though everything is still pistons and metal, it feels somehow more organic than the very artificial and prescribed test chambers.
Yeah, it's not customer facing, I suppose. It's just it's business to business. So I think that's a good example. I think Journey is a good example of that as well. Sparsity and just using colour and shape and scale, different scales of things in relation to each other in a really big way. So I was playing, and obviously Journey doesn't have any dialogue and stuff in it anyway, so it really is just all environmental storytelling to a point. I was replaying the opening of Journey again, and I think the opening has got one of my favorite examples of really good environmental storytelling that can only really be done in a video game. So like it starts with, and your guy is there, and it's the harsh sun, it's the sand, and it's the haze of the heat coming off the sand and the stuff, and right in front of you is a sand dune that's sort of the size of like a small hill. And so at once when you start going up it, it's hard and the guy's moving slower. It almost sounds like he's panting or whatever. He's not, but maybe it's just sort of one of those things that the game has done so well that it makes you almost sense things that are not there. So at the same time, the mountain, the hill is a problem, is an obstacle, but it's also like a savior because it's cooler. And it's protecting you from the sun. It's shading you from the sun, and the way they use lighting and shadows and stuff in that game really pushes that, makes that sort of front and center. But then you get to the top, and then you go down, and in front of you see like these graves. What you infer are probably graves. So immediately there, you're getting this sense of like dynasty, almost like sort of legacy. Like there's all these people that have come before you that looks like they've died. But I think the nicest thing about it is when you move close to them, your controller just vibrates once as you get close to each one, and it's almost like communicating that like there's still some vibration of life left here. There's still some resonance of life left here, like a ripple of life still exists, and that's environmental storytelling, but it's just communicated through a controller, which I think is really, really clever, really excellent use of game. Things, properties and forms of communications that are unique to games. I think that's and it's subtle as well. Like it's not just like slamming over the head with a text log saying, and here are people that you sense a ripple of life from these things. Like there's much more slickly designed than
show
that.
Don't tell. And well the text log thing I think is because there are a lot of games that I can think of that do text logs. Well, there's a lot of games that do text logs for sure. I mean, that's, we've been using those for decades.
Yeah, BioShock.
There's a bunch of games. There's a bunch of games that use them very well. But that for me, although it is a form of environmental storytelling, it's also, I'm kind of less impressed by that. I feel like it's a bit of a blunt tool approach, because even a game like Horizon Zero Dawn, that the story of that game I really enjoy. I like how it's revealed as you play through the game. There's a couple of twists, and it's not but it just kind of moves along. It progresses as you progress through the world. There isn't like you're not following a specific plot line. That's not why you're doing the things you're doing, but you uncover these things as you go along. But it often feels like when that's happening, particularly text logs as opposed to audio logs, when a text log is presented to you, you stop what you're doing and you read it, or you don't if you're not interested.
It's more audio logs than BioShock actually, isn't it?
It is audio logs. Yeah, and it's more jarring when it's a text log that you stop and read. And although it can be very effective, and some of them, particularly some of the side ones that you find in Horizon, are like, I remember one particular story thread, and it's really quite emotional. Like it's a heartbreaking story from the point of view of the character that it's being told from. And it's a completely optional thing. You may or may not see it. But it's also, I find that to be like, I believe it's easier to do that than it is to convey some of those same things purely through the environment and the space that you're moving through and the way that you're moving through it. Like whether you're having to, for example, use the vents to get around a place because of stuff that's happened. I find that's the stuff I respond more strongly to, possibly because I've just seen too many text logs. I'm kind of like, there is a cap on how effective they can be, even if they are brilliant. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but it is still another text log. So yeah, I'm not, it's a slight peeve with text logs, but more positively, the games that do it very well as you move through the environment, I think those are the ones. I like Half-Life 2 with City 17 particularly, and like The Last of Us and those that you've mentioned. But I mean, how do you feel about text logs as part of environmental storytelling? Is it sort of a completely valid and powerful tool for you, or is it a bit like cheating? That's kind of how I feel like it's a bit like cheating somehow.
Yeah, I think it is a completely valid and potentially powerful tool. I do think that text logs have a lot of examples, probably more examples of when they're bad or seem rushed or seem kind of actually more disconnected from the environment than anything.
Retrofitted, I think, in a lot of cases.
And I think they suffer as a whole because there's a lot of bad ones. But I think when they're done well, I think they can be particularly good. And there are examples, I think sometimes when they're really good, they are the ones where like you might find multiple text logs that refer to a same thing or is from someone's point of view, and you see those regularly throughout the game. So the new Amnesia, which I've played and totally forgotten the name of.
Rebirth?
Amnesia Rebirth. Memorable. It is a bit of a sort of just roll the dice, random name generator title. But there's text logs in there from a character. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a character, and you see this character's text logs a number of times throughout the game. It's a fairly short game anyway, so you know, if you're reading them all, it's not like you've forgotten them when you come up to like part 2, part 3, part 4 or whatever. And I think that form of them can be really good because it gives you when they're written well, it gives you another perspective of the thing that you're seeing. So it sort of like challenges you to not just take your own first opinion, your own first reaction to this as like, okay, well, this is it now. It kind of has this side angle in. I think that's good. I think it's kind of not a text log, but it is text. In Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, whatever, they have excellent use of item descriptions, which tell you little bits about the world, and they're short. They're only like 2 lines, or well, not 2 lines, like 2 sentences or whatever. The actual bit about like what this does and where it came from and where it's found and who it was made for and whatever. And through the items in the game, they're telling you a lot about the world, and I think those ones are really those kind of examples. I think on text logs are genuinely quite good.
Yeah, well, I think that has the intrinsic benefit of not being. It's kind of external to the world because the text log itself doesn't exist as a piece of paper sitting on the side of a rock
for item descriptions.
Yeah, an item description is you pick that up, and that could be anything. That could be your character's interpretation of that item. Or it could be the item itself speaking to you. Or like there's stuff there that isn't like, well, I still literally speaking with a voice, but you know, it's imparting this information to you.
Yeah, it is still a bit of a cheat because it's like, okay, so you now pick up the ring, and it's like, oh, the ring has come with a handy note to say like who made it and where it came from and why it's here and who it was worn by. And like it's almost like you've picked it off of a shelf and it's in the packaging and you can read the back of the packaging. It's like, oh yes, great.
But they do, and the way they often link together, and like you said, like there's different things in the Souls games that link not just together within any one installment, but as a whole as well. And I know, like, the lore and the storytelling and the environmental storytelling in the Souls games I recognise that it is quite outstanding. I don't particularly engage with it during the game, though. It's kind of an odd thing where I enjoy playing the Souls games, probably Bloodborne more than the Demon's Souls or Dark Souls, to be honest. And Sekiro I just was rubbish at, and I really wanted to be good at it, but I was just rubbish at it. So I enjoy playing those games for what they are, and then I enjoy going and watching videos or reading about the lore in them. More than I do enjoy piecing it together as I'm playing the game. It's kind of like I'm playing the game, I'm just trying to get through it and I'm surviving as that character in that world, and then later on I can read about it. Kind of that's
I also think
Soul stuff.
Yeah, and I also think with trying to absorb all of that stuff when you're playing the game, because the design of those games is purposefully obviously difficult and throw up a lot of barriers to you all the time. And there's also a lot of secret stuff and a lot of very like obscure things that you need to do to reach a lot of areas or gain a lot of things. So I think watching it or reading stuff from people who have gone through and sort of collected everything and categorized everything, and I can put it in this sort of a form that is easily read as, okay, now this is the story. This is the story of the world. It's easier to do that afterwards than it is when you're playing, because you don't know, you might be the most diligent player, but you still don't know for sure that you're just missing things, and there are gaps in this knowledge that you've got. So I think piecing it together while playing within a game that adheres to that kind of design can be a challenge.
Yeah. It also feeds in, for the Souls games, it does also, the fact that you go and read it or watch it perhaps, also feeds into the community aspect of those games that we've touched on, I think, before.
Yeah, the Death episode.
Yeah, like the game, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the game design can incorporate that and can kind of, From Software can kind of certainly not rely on it, but can get the benefit of knowing that they have a very engaged community and that people are going to piece this stuff together and that there is the appetite for it.
Yeah.
And that adds to the community feel that we're kind of in some sense all in this together, even though my experience of it and yours was separate and, we may never have even crossed into each other's worlds, but we have still kind of had an experience in this space. And then, reading about somebody else's interpretation of that or translation of that is just part of that community aspect for me. So it has its own kind of ephemeral benefits as well.
Yeah. There's another example of just, this is different, moving on from Dark Souls, a different game entirely. Maneater. Have you played that? The game where you play as a shark. It's currently just come on PS Plus, which is why I've played it.
No.
And it's quite blunt, the environmental storytelling there, but it's quite effective in that it creates an emotion around the idea of playing as a shark. And you play as a shark and you very quickly begin, within minutes of playing, you're asked to kill and eat humans. But there's some just pretty heavy-handed environmental storytelling at the very start that kind of makes you be on the shark side, because the game,
humans are destroying the sharks' habitat or something.
Well, yeah, exactly. So you begin in an underwater like sewer or some sort of pipe like tunnel system that's all bricked up, and there's like garbage in the water, and it's, there's this piece of rusted metal around, and the shark's got something like stuck into its side. And that's a tutorial area. So it acts as the tunnels act as an easy way for you to learn how to kill fish, because the fish can't get away from you. So it's like tutorializing that, using the environment for that. But because you're this natural sort of like big, powerful beast in this world and you're introduced to it in this world that's completely alien to this thing, and like it's not supposed to be here, it's destroying its habitat, etc., etc., etc. So you have the compassion for the shark. You're immediately on the shark side. So when you start killing the humans who are like just in the water, just like, enjoying it, polluting it with vehicles and boats and stuff, it's like, well, yeah, all right, fine, I'm definitely going to kill these guys. Like, I feel completely fair. And it's very blunt, it's very obvious and in your face, but it's very powerful form to elicit an emotion and a sort of to encourage you to take sides, rather than just telling you. Obviously it does tell you about the world and the environment and stuff, but really its main point is to change the emotions that you're feeling here, which is really powerful.
It's like that hammy actor not hammy actor thing, but that like stereotypical actor thing of what's my motivation. Is that once you understand that, you can then get on board, basically. It's like, it doesn't take much, and something like polluting a shark's habitat is enough to so you're already in a game called Maneater, you probably get a sense of what it is you're there to do, and having that narrative motivation helps you along, helps you feel like you're on the good side. And films like, actually, my kids the other day watched Despicable Me, and that's a bit like that, like, because that's a film ostensibly about bad guys. Like, everybody, the main characters in it are villains. They're literally super villains. But there is still a good guy. And that's contextualized through his actions. And not just because, he adopts these 3 kids and they're cute and they bring out this thing in him, but also because the other people in it, their actions are more obviously and explicitly bad. Like GRU has a sense of fairness and has a sense of like, you know, honor among thieves almost that some of the other guys don't. So just that of putting you on his side as well. It's like, it's that kind of quite basic thing, but it's it contextualizes what you're there for.
Well, I suppose there's no objective good and bad, is it? It's all subjective, it's all relative. But yeah, on the emotion thing as well, I mean, we're running out of time, but I also think it's because I think that's quite an important part of environmental storytelling. So it's not just about telling you a story of the world; it's also about creating those emotions. And Journey obviously is like the king of this, or like one of the kings of this, and one of the obvious examples. And that it's all about emotion. It's all about just like putting you through these ranging emotions, this sort of rainbow of emotions as the game moves forward, and it uses like color and shape and all the stuff we've spoken about before to do that. But I was thinking, like, when I was just sort of playing the game, that it's kind of similar to the way like, again, to use like art examples, like it is conceptual art in the way like an Ai Weiwei sculpture or like a Rothko painting is just color and shape. But it does immediately elicit emotional responses. Like, you know, Ai Weiwei stuff is very political as well, of course, and has a lot of like definite things to say. But certainly the Rothko ones, like, it's really about emotion. Like, it's about like making you feel certain things just through these colors and shapes and the power of that. And that is also storytelling. Like, for me, like definitely 100% storytelling. Like, the story of this game was sadness. The story of this game was joy. The story of this game was fear. Like, that story, it might not have like a beginning, middle, and end, but it's, you know, it's pushing you through different responses, and that's definitely a story.
Yeah, that, and it's fun. Rothko, I'm far more familiar with. It's funny you mentioned that, because that when I was younger, that there was a Rothko painting that was like it was my favourite painting. Before I sort of moved away from having a specific favourite anything. Earth and Green, I think. Earth and Green, I think it was anyway. But yeah, that was like my favourite painting for that reason, because it is shapes, it's colours. But to me, it said a lot. It told a story, and in the way that perhaps the best art of that form does, it told a different story. Not every time I looked at it, but certainly it told multiple stories. It didn't just tell one story. Well, yeah,
because your what the emotions and the state that you're in when you approach something like that impacts and reflects differently back on you when you see it. And I think that's the same for Journey as well. Journey, depending on your emotional state, your mental state when you come to that game, you'll have different responses to the different scenes and the different moments in that game, for sure.
Yeah. The first time I played Journey, it was at the end of a very long working week. I think I'd worked 7 or 8 days on the trot, and I sat down on a Sunday afternoon with it and played it all through in one go. And I remember this feeling of release. It was the first time I played it. That's how it made me feel. And that was definitely, and I've been back to it since and replayed it and haven't captured that same feeling. It's a different feeling. I get a different understanding of it each time I play it. But yeah, definitely there is a huge interpretive aspect to the best environmental storytelling, be it in video games or elsewhere. Yeah. And that's what I guess makes it such a strong tool in video games, that it is what you see and what I see may be different things, irrespective of what the original intent was. You're not being beaten over the head with it. It's up to you to take from it what you will.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we've actually come to some sort of conclusion. For once.
Yeah, we're getting better at this. That's good.
So, environmental storytelling, pretty cool, basically. Yeah. Thank you for listening. That was environmental storytelling, and we hope that you found it interesting. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject and your insights into examples of especially good storytelling told through the world. You can find us on Twitter and a bunch of other social media platforms. We are at Indie by Design. That's at Indie by Design on all platforms. Also, do check out our website, indiebydesign.net. When you're there, you can buy our video game books, including Oddworld Abe's Origins, which tells a story and uncovers the arts of the entire Oddworld series from the original Abe's Odyssey back in 1997, all the way up to 2021's upcoming Oddworld Soulstorm. We're also taking pre-orders for 20 Double Fine Years, our book on everything Double Fine Productions, from Psychonauts to Grim Fandango and Day of the Tentacle Remastered to Brutal Legend and Broken Age. Again, our website, indiebydesign.net. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.